It's 6 p.m. over here in Minneapolis, which means 7 p.m. on the East Coast. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being on time and for joining us to How to Take a Gap Year, the ultimate crash course, where you will find our top tricks and resources for nailing down the ultimate gap year adventure of your dreams. Now, if I can just change the slide. Oh my goodness, go too fast. There we go. So just really quick, some resources that I want to remind you all about today if you're not already aware of them. The first one I want to jump to is this one in the middle, which is join us at a fair. So February is Gap Year Exploration Month, and no better time than to make connections and chat one-on-one with Gap Year program providers and wonderful Gap Year counselors and consultants like Jane and Jason than now in February at one of our upcoming fairs. Jason is actually, or Jane, oh my goodness, you'll have to tell me who. Jason is going to be tabling at our next upcoming, I scared Jane, at our next upcoming fair on Saturday. So you definitely don't want to miss that one. If you can't make it though, we have plenty of other Gap Year fairs to choose from. And don't worry, I'll be dropping a link to register in the chat later on. Second thing that I want to bring to your attention is just our Gap Year Hub. That's our main Gap Year Fairs website, which you can find on Go Overseas. And again, I'll be dropping a link to that, but it's really great. You'll be able to explore all of our recommended Gap Year programs, read verified alumni reviews about those programs. And if you're interested, and I'm guessing you're interested since you're tuning into this event, find information about scholarships as well. So we'll follow up on that shortly, but we are launching a $5,000 scholarship on March 1st on our website. So definitely stay tuned for that. And then finally, I want to call attention to our Gap Matcher quiz, which is perhaps my favorite resource of all. It is a really amazing matching quiz program in which you can fill it out quickly. It only takes a matter of minutes, and you'll input all of your interests and your goals regarding gap time, and then you'll be able to receive a customized list of Gap Year program suggestions based on you. So highly recommend that you take that. And again, I'll be dropping a link to that as well later on in the chat and in our follow-up emails. Okay, and just a reminder, so this is one of many crash course sessions. So right now, of course, we're on February 8th, Gap Year scholarships and funding, but more is yet to come. So if you're interested in learning more about what alumni have to say about Gap Year programs or Gap Year's career exploration, definitely be sure to tune in then. All of our crash course sessions are around the same time, except for one. I believe that's going to be the Gap Year parents and educators. But again, I'll follow up with that via email, and that will be 7 to 8 p.m. EST. Okay, and finally, before we really dive into it, I just want to give you a heads up that we will be sending out a survey after this event because more than anything, we want to hear from you. I really want to hear from you. We are on our second crash course series of the entire crash course sessions. And so we have plenty of room to improve and really build upon those sessions based on your feedback. So definitely do voice your opinions, share your thoughts there. I am personally really eager to read through all of those responses. And as an added bonus, we will be automatically entering you into a contest to win $250 simply by filling out that survey within 24 hours of the event. So you really can't lose. It's an awesome opportunity, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Okay, and without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our wonderful, magnificent co-hosts, Jane and Jason of J2 Guides. So I cannot speak highly, or I just could wax poetic about these two. They have been Gap Year speakers at our USA Gap Year Fairs events since I believe 2011. They're both accredited Gap Year consultants. They are some of the kindest, nicest, smartest, wisest people I know. So we are so lucky to have them here today. It goes without saying. Thank you so much for joining us, Jane and Jason.
Thank you so much, Claire.
So kind.
Wonderful introduction.
Yeah.
As Claire said, we are Jane and Jason Soroyan, a wife, husband team, lifetime experiential educators. Jane and I were both so lucky in college to take gap time, and we certainly did not know each other way back when, but each of us had such powerful, meaningful experiences in taking this time to just get out in the world, put our knowledge to work in real world hands-on settings. And it inspired both of us to go into leadership of these great experiential education opportunities for young adults, both high school and college age and gap year students. we moved from that field leadership role, which is a rare transition, into actually directing a gap year program. And so we were working with hundreds of students every year, sending them abroad, getting a chance to help them with community service opportunities. And now for the last 12 years have been accredited gap year consultants, meaning we support young adults and families looking into this idea of gap year, into making whether or not they're going to make that decision, help them define their goals, and then connect them with reputable, vetted resources. So needless to say, we love our work. We love working with young adults who are right on the cusp of change, from that living at home experience to moving out into the world on their own, and whatever we can do to support them in that growth opportunity. We really enjoy that.
Yes. And we actually love talking about how to finance the gap year. So as a segue into kind of an overview of what to expect ahead, and Claire, you could advance us whenever you have a moment. These are the 5 points we want to cover. We always like to leave time in the crash courses because they usually are more intimate groups that we can actually really handle the chat questions. So feel free to put them in as they come up. Jason and I will probably not look at them, but Claire will be. And we'll keep track of them and save them all for the end. But financial literacy, students having financial agency, skin in the game, is such a powerful part of planning and executing a gap year. And I think I know there's a huge stigma that gap year equals expensive and gap year equals privilege. And I think there probably are some, shreds of truth to some of those ideas. And Jason and I have supported so many students who have self-funded their gap year, who began their journey with maybe $500 in their savings account, and ultimately who maybe spent $500 in their entire gap year. So there is a gap year for everyone. Does more money make it easier? Maybe. Does less money mean you can't do it? Absolutely not. And so that's what we want to kind of share. And we're so eager to share this tonight with you all. Some of the kind of overall strategies, all the way down to some specific tips and resources to help get you on the way. If you've seen any of our other presentations, you'll know that typically what we start with is dreaming big. Don't think about budget, we always say. Don't think about fears. Let's dream big first and then come to the practicality of it. So that's kind of the 1.0. This is the 2.0. Now we're at this conversation. We have an idea. We're really invested in this idea. How do we actually support it? So let's kick it off with like the first place to start. Number one, identify and track your budget. And we can advance when you're ready, Claire. Do you want to start this one off?
Yeah, we may not talk about Bruno, but we do talk about budget.
Couldn't resist, sorry.
Yeah. One of the major messages we want to convey to families is what an incredible opportunity gap year is to talk about financial literacy with your child, and to really help build their skills in this way. We know you're not made of money. We're not made of money. Maybe your young aspiring gapper doesn't quite know that yet, but this is an awesome opportunity to start talking about the idea of value. What is of value to you? What is worth spending money on? How else could we accomplish that goal? And so we're going to talk about that a lot. But if you take away one message from this entire presentation, it's that we encourage you to have the transparent conversation together as a family, help that young adult step into that first moment of adulthood and say, we're going to talk about money. And one of the big questions is, what's the budget? Do you have a sense of that? Have you talked about that together, just as kind of the adults, in the room, or the adults in the room? How much money is available for your young adult to access during this time? What could the budget be? Or what's the philosophy around your budget? Is your child going to work? Is that the expectation? Are they going to contribute and you're going to match that? Are they on their own? Do you have funds set aside? So really looking into what's the budget.
It's such a great, and we've had so many parents come to us after giving this first tip and say, thank you so much. Our child came to us and said, we heard Jane and Jason speak, and they said, I should come to you and sit down and ask if we can have a conversation about the gap year budget. And all of a sudden a parent's like, wow, that's fantastic. Thank you. So, and then yes, leading into the expectations around, we've had families been like, parents like, we'll pay for this thing, but you're going to pay for the rest, or we'll help with this, but you've got to cover that. So that's what that expectation covering. With the spreadsheet piece, this is something that may seem obvious, but I think the obvious is always worth stating. But start a spreadsheet right now, or maybe in 40 minutes when we're done. And you'll just start to, you can go about it in one of two ways. If you already know what your total budget might be, like, I think by this time we might have X amount, or, then in the top of the line, I'd have your total budget. And then in the rows following, start to think of every possible expense that could exist. A passport, a visa, immunizations, gear, like a backpack or suitcase, flights, and start to go from there, a program fee. And then think of the other daily things of life, which I always break down into housing, food, transportation, and fun. And if you just start putting those down, you could even start being like, well, and you might want to be in Europe. You might say, well, I imagine that, hostels look like, a youth hostel looks like it could maybe get $50 a night. All right, $50 a night times, start to make your formulas. And as you start to put in some rough numbers, you can see that top line of what your total budget is start to go down, and start to kind of estimate how that's going to go. You could be like, wow, housing, that's a really big cost. Is there a way we can limit that? So there's lots to say. We've given entire workshops just on this spreadsheet idea. But if you start just a basic spreadsheet, the Google Drive now makes it so fabulous for parents and students to have access to a shared gap year space, a gap year folder with documents and spreadsheets to be sharing. But to start to document now could also give you a sense of what we're kind of working towards, what we have, and where the biggest line items are. And that might start to help you understand, all right, around this goal of Spanish, Spain's looking really costly. Maybe we can look towards Central or South America. And we're going to give some other tips later on about other ways to, of course, spread that budget. So making a spreadsheet and starting to document expenses now, as opposed to the day before your program begins, is really helpful. And I find it's a great incentive for families.
Yeah, and for all of the potential gappers out there who are excited about this idea, you can just, of course, duplicate spreadsheets and make very different scenarios, right? The Spain versus the Central or South America scenario that might be your gap year. You're just going to keep updating it. Your time is also valuable. So all of the energy you put in to actually doing research, make sure you're documenting what you learn, because it's so easy to forget once you've looked at 3 or 4 or 5 programs. It's tough to recall those details. So then we start diving into what are next steps. And there's a lot of things to think about. One light item that I always put in our budget when we're looking at family budget is, what's the squish, right? Things always cost more than you're going to expect them to. Unexpected costs come up all the time. Do you have that built in? Once you start doing that, narrowing down your options, you can actually start getting a much more accurate picture of what this gap year might cost, and ultimately where you might invest a little more money, or where you might have to find a more creative way in order to kind of meet that goal that you have. We can advance to the next slide.
We really love how creative and scrappy our students can get. And this is a great time to really push up your sleeves and start thinking about, how can my child work, create, and ask? Seniors have, a solid 6 to 8 months before launching into the gap year. Juniors, sophomores, anyone else on this presentation have even more. So let's talk about those 3 prompts that we want to have you really think about in terms of bringing some more money in during and even before your gap year begins. Work may sound obvious, but again, really important to state that if you are willing and able to work, you should do so. And we have students, actually a student, Freya of ours, was just featured, had a 3-minute video on the Gap Year Association website or Instagram feed today. And she self-funded her gap year. She worked on both summers on either side of her gap year. She got scholarships from some of her organized programs. She did low-cost programs. She probably spent over $15,000 on her gap year that she earned and saved by herself, including the summers on either side of her gap year. It's a real success story. And she traveled, she got out there. So working in the summers, working after school. Notice in that first one, work from a friend or a relative's home. The point being, save on rent. So sometimes it's like, maybe I'll go to, I'll go to Martha's Vineyard and rent a house with a bunch of friends and work. Housing is so expensive. This is the second time it's come up already in the 5 minutes we've started. housing will be the first thing that takes the biggest impact on your gap year because it's built into programs, or if you want to travel, there's that. So if you want to work and save money, the best way to save the most money is to be living at home. Or if you want to do summers, is it a camp? Do you have a friend or relative's house you can live in? Try to avoid the overhead of rent so that is almost 100% income. And our own nephew last summer also saved and earned a few thousand to pay his parents back for part of his gap year.
Yeah. And so students, we know that you all are a hustling generation. You're innovators. You realize that you've got skill sets. You've learned many things that adults either don't have time to, or the desire to actually do. And you should capitalize on all of that. Are you good at social media? Of course you are. There are a lot of companies out there that actually could utilize your skill sets. People who are entrepreneurs really need that kind of help, and it could be done in a way that could be lucrative for you and beneficial to them. Are you artsy and creative? Could you put something up on Etsy and earn a little bit more? Are you interested in maybe hosting some kind of a gala as a way of highlighting the place that you're going to go and do some fundraising? There's lots of creative ways that you might be able to monetize, and all of these little pennies that you end up throwing in the jar are going to ultimately add up to making a big difference in your budget for the gap year. The more money that you can set aside, the more opportunities you can take on spontaneously as they present themselves throughout the year.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask. The people that know you and love you want to support you. Birthdays, holidays, graduation gifts, those can add up. And you could just actively and respectfully and lovingly encourage people to direct those well-intentioned gifts towards your gap year. Actually, I'm thinking about a gap year, and I'm putting a little call out to everyone that rather than, a book from Barnes and Noble, or if you wanted to get me a book, I'd actually love a travel guide because I'm going to Costa Rica on my gap year. Or I know everyone really wants to give me stuff for graduation. I could use a gift card for EMS or REI or some other outdoor store because I'm going on a program, I'm gonna have to get some gear. So help direct people in their gift giving. I've never heard anyone be offended by that. The people that love you want to support you. So just ask. It can be uncomfortable, but kind of like, we don't talk about budget. You'll be amazed when you lift the veil and go for it. I think how well received it is. And don't forget that non-monetary gifts like frequent flyer miles or things that you might be able to borrow, like a backpack from your cousin who was in Europe or did a study abroad semester in Argentina. They have a backpack. Maybe we can borrow that for a semester or a year. So there's loads of non-monetary gifts that could also go a long way. I was wondering, would you come with the work category? Can we go back up and would you touch on the seasonal work, both in the States and overseas? Because I know that students love to hear about that too.
Yeah, and this is something that's really special as an opportunity for gap year. There's amazing seasonal work that's available, both usually kind of in that kind of head and feet seasons, if you will, the winter season here in the Northern Hemisphere, and then summer. It's really easy to get work at local ski mountains if you're excited about snow sports, or even if you're not. They're desperate for people to be able to run lifts, be in customer service, to help cook food, to maintain rooms, and all of these other activities that they just can't get enough help doing. Summers need lifeguards, they need camp counselors, they need people to tutor their kids. There's a lot of opportunities for this. Interestingly, it's actually pretty hard for Americans to work abroad. There's only a few places that offer an American 18-year-old the chance to work abroad without kind of really being sponsored. And so you're going to want to look into a working holiday visa. And the working holiday visa is a special class of visa for 18 to 30-year-olds in most cases, where you could go, for example, to Australia, or you could go to New Zealand. We're actually just recently reading about how Canada is offering some now to Americans, which was not the case before. And this allows you to go work, and it could be working picking apples, it could be working as an au pair, it could be working in a cafe as a barista, it could be doing something that's a little more kind of high level. So there's opportunities out there. Think about working. You don't have to just be in the US when you're thinking about that.
And these destination seasonal jobs, as opposed to like when you're living at home and really working to kind of compile a little bit of a nest egg, these could be part of the gap year and they could be fun. And I have a student in Aspen, Colorado right now, and he is a skier, wanted to ski. Is he going to come home with $5,000 in his pocket? Probably not, but he's going to come home with what we call a cost neutral. So by working, and he does have to pay rent, but he's in a spectacular location. There are other young people, and he's he is skiing for like 3 months straight right now. So coming home without a big dent in the savings he's also hoping to have when going off to college. So work has kind of a few different interplays here, as you can see. So work, create, and ask. That's number 2 with our strategies around budgeting.
We are huge fans of gappers leveraging the network, leveraging the people that your family knows, and some of the resources that they might be able to offer you. Your family, your parents, your guardians know lots of people. They might know lots of people here in the United States. They might know lots of people who are abroad. And this is a great opportunity for you to announce from the highest rooftop that you are taking a gap year. And does anyone know anyone that can help you with that? Does anyone know anyone who has a bed that you can stay in, in a room somewhere? Does anyone have an opportunity for an internship that might be able to offer you? Does anyone have a lead on a job? Does anyone have a discount that they can offer to you to be able to go on some kind of a travel experience? Leveraging your resources. And this takes time. It takes energy. You have to ask. This is a great place where if you don't have a LinkedIn page, to set that up. If on your social media, you can start including people who are broader than just your friend group, you want to start actually advertising this as much as you can, but really starting with your parents and your family to say, who do you know and what do they do and where do they live? And ultimately, how can they help me?
One of the reasons why leveraging your network is such a profound experience for gappers to start to really expose themselves to, is because it is a lifelong experience. It's a lifelong skill. Networking is how some of the best things in your life are going to happen. Some of the best job opportunities, potentially friends and partners for life, adventure buddies, you just don't know. And so this whole idea of like 6 degrees of separation, which I feel like I've read has now been turned to like 4 degrees of separation, but like we're all connected, and chances are your parents are connected, your professors, your friends, to really interesting people living in interesting places, doing interesting things. Not only is this great on the budget, we have had students come back time and time again and said it also became one of the most potent pieces of their gap year. I just want to give 2 quick examples. A student who moved to Alaska in the spring years ago to live with her mom's sister, her aunt, who she never had the chance to get to know that well. Her mom's sister was a midwife in a small Alaskan town. My student was interested in pre-med. So she got to know her aunt, which what a thrill for her own mother too, right? They became fast friends and got to kind of shadow and work in the midwifery center and clinic, which also gave her great exposure to the field she wanted and at basically no cost. Last spring, wonderful student Solly, also self-funding his gap year, went and spent time in the Southwest with his aunt and uncle who were rebuilding kind of like an in-law unit, like an Airbnb and rental. He got to live there in exchange for helping to kind of build it and work with them. He's an avid rock climber and now positioned himself, he's from Massachusetts, in a gorgeous location during great weather and great climbing season, and met other people and got out there and to go climbing. So these could be some of the most powerful memories of your gap year and not just a great cost savings.
And this is actually important to just share as we're talking at the 2.0 level. If you've attended a gap year event, you're mostly looking at gap year programs, which we love, right? Yeah. We love facilitated gap year experiences. We led those, we directed a program that did that. And many gap year students will go on to other kinds of opportunities throughout their gap year as well. And this is where these scenarios like what you described in Alaska and what you described for Solly really come into play, because you've got a lot of time in your gap year. We're talking about the better part of 9 months for most students, if not a little more. You're probably going to be involved in a few different things.
Yep. All right, let's move on to number 4. Want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, so abundantly available out in the world are low-cost options, and this is an opportunity that we encourage students to approach eyes wide open and with a lot of care and intention. This is where you want to cast a broad net. But the idea of low-cost options is that there are truly thousands and thousands of opportunities out there where you can go and work a set number of hours, say 20 hours a week or so. And in exchange for your labor, you will get room and board. So you'll be housed and fed in reasonable conditions. And this could be at camps all over the world, at retreat centers, on farms, on vineyards, on coffee plantations, you name it. There's opportunities out there in literally every country, in every state in our nation. Here's some on the left-hand column of the most common listservs that offer you these types of opportunities. So this is the broad picture. You might be going, this is amazing. Like, of course I'm going to go do that. And here's where the big asterisk is. You really have to go in eyes wide open, because you're going to have very little information about these opportunities before you commit to them. And so it's important to do your due diligence. Just because somebody advertises an experience and puts great pictures up there doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a great fit for you. Example, a student of mine recently decided they were going to go to Hawaii to live on a farm and do a work exchange internship. This was not a placement that I recommended, but they found it on their own. We talked about due diligence questions. They asked those questions. They felt like they got the right answers. She arrived there in the middle of the night, wasn't greeted in a way that felt great, found herself in a kind of dirty yurt where she was staying. And the next morning found out what kind of work she was going to be doing and was really bummed because it was not what was advertised. And that was a scenario she had to pivot out of immediately because it really wasn't going to be acceptable. If you choose an experience like this, you have to be willing to be independent. You have to be willing to pivot kind of on a dime. And you're going to want to do as much vetting as you can by talking to references in advance.
Yeah. And I really appreciate your honesty, because we don't want it all to seem easy and picture perfect. Undoubtedly, the student has learned a tremendous amount.
That's right.
She was never unsafe. She had a counselor that Jason has been texting and calling her. I can promise you for the last 4 days, right there for her, finding that sweet spot. Am I encouraging you to stay? Or am I helping you analyze if this is the right thing? Are we moving on? So, but this is real world. And I think for anyone who's seen any of our conversations before, we talk about the progression of a gap year.
Right.
And if you have a full gap year, it's very common that you might be doing 3 different experiences, let's say. These kinds of lower cost work exchange options are best suited towards the second half of your gap year. So as Jason said, the kinds of programs that come to the gap year fairs are generally very structured, a bit more costly, fabulous, organized gap year programs that range from 1 to 3 months. If your budget can support it, and we're going to actually talk about scholarships next. So that's the kind of thing you want to front load in your gap year. We want to begin the gap year with structure, with support, so that students really find their feet as travelers, as young adults away from home, managing travel, immigration, homesickness, culture shock, whatever it may be, on their own, with peers, with skilled mentors and facilitators. That program, it ends, but the skill set does not. And that skill set is now part of that young gapper, and they will take those skills on with them, making these more independent work exchange options so much more successful later in the year. So again, on the right side of this slide, think about balancing maybe a higher cost experience with a lower cost one, and definitely start with that one with more structure, which will inevitably be the one of higher cost. So we love these work exchange options. They are all worth investigation. You've got to do a lot of due diligence and think about it strategically as kind of a part 2 or 3 on that spectrum of a gap year.
It's great advice.
And here we are at scholarships and 529s. I think there's one more slide of this and we'll start to get to the questions. Do you want to kick us off here? Or
Yeah. So Go Overseas, which is the organization that sponsors and puts on the USA Gap Year Fairs, has tons of amazing resources on their website, including a range of different scholarships. And one that's coming up, we hope that Claire, you'll be able to speak about a little bit, because there's an exciting opportunity that's going to be happening in March.
Sorry, it took me quite a while to unmute myself there, but thanks so much. Thanks, Jason, for that segue. Yes, we are going to be launching a $5,000 scholarship on March 1st. So definitely encourage all of you to apply. I dropped a link to our USA Gap Year Fairs webpage in the chat, and I would just be monitoring that for when that scholarship does go live, because on March 1st, you'll be able to find all the instructions there for applying for the scholarship, as well as the timeline and any other kind of pertinent details.
That's great.
Thanks,
Thank you, Claire. So yeah, so right now you should be putting that in your Calendly or whatever kind of scheduling system you use so that you get a ping on March 1st. So you want to get on top of that $5,000 scholarship. The Gap Year Association, another fantastic website, also has an extensive list of scholarships and resources available for gappers. It does look like there some of the scholarships are not as available in the last year or two. I did notice, because I was looking for a student. I actually Heard another counselor suggest the same thing. So it's really worth looking soon for seniors because some of those deadlines are actually already rapidly approaching. The other great thing about it being Gap Year Exploration Month, it being February right now, is that Gap Year Association is also going to be raffling off at least one Tortuga backpack. So if you get up on that website, follow them on socialgram, that works, right?
Yeah.
You can find more out about getting a Tortuga backpack. So those are two great websites that will within each have a dozen or so scholarship ideas. What we want to focus on this last slide is to actually talk about some of those larger Gap Year programs that many of you are seeing during the USA Gap Year Fair series, because they are wins on two different counts. One, they may look like some of the more expensive programs. They could range from $10,000 to $18,000. Many of them also have ample needs-based scholarships and financial aid. So it's really worth reaching out to them and reaching out to them sooner rather than later and talking about what is available. I think almost all of them have it. If they don't have a lot of information on their website, that's a great opportunity, if not in a breakout room, to actually make that first specific inquiry by email and even request a phone call. We talk a lot to our families about how it's wonderful and certainly appropriate to be kind of a passive recipient of information in these early stages of gap planning. But if scholarships and budget are on your mind and critical for you to be able to pursue these programs, this is time to not be quiet, not be passive, not just follow someone on Instagram, but to actually get on the phone with a decision maker at a Gap Year program and start to begin that relationship so that you can find out and make yourself an eligible candidate for some of those scholarships.
Mm. And finally, many families, if they were able to invest in their children's college education funds early on, may have utilized a 529 or 529 fund. Typically, these are funds that are reserved for higher education, credit-bearing courses. But interestingly, over the last few years, some Gap Year programs independently have created relationships with different universities so that they can offer credit-bearing courses, which will allow you to use 529 money to be able to pay not only for those credits, but also for the program fees for that Gap Year experience. So imagine being able to dip into that 529 and pay that $15,000 program fee. Additionally, the Gap Year Association, which we've mentioned several times now, has an accreditation process that every one of their accredited programs is eligible through Portland State University to offer credits to students. And so while those credits may or may not transfer to the university that you choose to attend afterwards, it does allow you to use 529 money pretty easily. These are resources that maybe you didn't think that you could tap into, but you might actually be able to utilize, which is wonderful and could take a big burden off of this year.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And again, keeping in mind that we're looking strategically at, if you were to look at a larger, more expensive Gap Year program, larger meaning larger tuition, if we can bring that down to a sizable amount for your family, and that took up the bulk of your budget, and that was only a semester, the whole 4 slides preceding were all about what you might do for the months following.
That's right.
So it might be the case, and often is the case, that your first organized experience might consume half to 3/4 of your budget, if not all of it. But don't fear. Hopefully you've already gotten some great ideas to see how you could still create the rest of the year into a really robust and fruitful time.
Yeah, and I feel like this is just such a nice segue probably into our last slide, but you can think back now to these 5 major areas we've talked about, but having that transparent conversation about the budget being the very first thing and starting to create that spreadsheet is critically important, because you can then really start looking with confidence at some of these amazing experiences and plotting out how your Gap Year might actually manifest.
Yeah. There's so much to say about the topic, but I think, Claire, we talked about trying to kind of give a tight presentation so we could really address questions if they're coming in and take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I always learn so much from your presentation. So I, for one, am hugely grateful for that. I'm going to stop this share so everybody can see our gorgeous faces as they ask their questions. So please don't be shy at all. This is really your opportunity to make the most of this crash course and shoot Jane and Jason any kind of questions, concerns, inquiries you might have about Gap Year funding or Gap Years in general. I know that there was a question that came in the chat from MFF. And I might ask you to kind of specify your question a bit, but it's about FAFSA. So maybe if you guys could speak a little bit about FAFSA, Jane and Jason,
Sure.
that'd be phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a really important
Yeah.
question. I'm so glad that you asked about it. So FAFSA essentially is federal financial aid, which is awarded to students based on a variety of measures. And of course, every student is eligible to apply who's going to university or college in the country. So far, FAFSA is not available to be utilized for gap year programs unless individual colleges have their own gap year based experience that's housed within their college. And or there's some kind of special exception. I can tell you that the Gap Year Association is working really hard to normalize that ability to use FAFSA dollars, but as of right now, that is not broadly available. So unfortunately not. You could, of course, utilize student loans, but generally you have to be matriculating at a school before you can do that. So that would be like maybe taking your gap year after your freshman year or something like that.
I feel like that's a great segue probably into another question we get from families about what if we've gotten into college and we've been awarded either merit or financial aid. And I wonder if this is a good time for us to address that as well. There's a lot of variability from school to school, so there's not one clear answer. We have found in the past when students are awarded merit aid, when requesting a deferral, they have very successfully also had that merit aid deferred. Generally, again, merit aid being very different because the school's like, we want you, we love who you are and what you're going to bring to our community. That's probably not going to change. It's only going to get enhanced through a gap year. So there will be a process. You need to inquire. It will not be revoked by your inquiring. I know it's really scary to put yourself out there. But that is a conversation you'll need to have sooner. Financial aid, you generally speaking will have to reapply because your financial picture could change. It's just a numbers game. So if you came into some money, that would change your financial picture if you were to defer for a year. So yeah, financial aid, almost always you would need to reapply, but both are worth asking from the institutions that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you both so much. That is a really important point for sure. And I think it does tie in well with that FAFSA question.
Yeah.
So please keep dropping those questions. I have one that I was thinking of, Jane and Jason, actually, if you wouldn't mind answering this one. So say I'm a student and my parent is not very supportive about me taking gap time. How would you recommend I kind of start to broach this topic of gap year funding and, the costs associated with it?
I think Jane and I really feel like students who are motivated to take gap time can actually present a very compelling set of arguments about why a gap year might be really possible for them and why it would be a great step. We always encourage students to get very clear on why they want to take this gap year in the first place. So if you're wanting to address physical health because you're a concussed athlete, if you feel like it would just be a wonderful year for you to get out and learn life skills, framing this in a way that your parents or guardians are going to really understand, like, I really want to get out there. I want to be more independent. I want to feel more confident being more independent. I want to be more focused and understand what my major is going to be before I go in and spend all of this money, your money, on taking college classes to kind of figure it out. That seems like a hard way to do it. What if I actually got hands-on experience? So we encourage you to really figure out your why for wanting to take the time and creating a compelling argument for your family about why this would be valuable. And then you can take that next step and say, and look, like, I'm not an expert in this, but I created a spreadsheet. I created a budget based on what I've seen. Here's the costs of some of these programs. Can you help me figure this out? Like, is there any way we could do this? Is this something that could be beneficial? Or I'm willing to work. Look at me do this. I'm willing to apply for jobs this summer. I'm willing to work this winter. I'm willing to help have skin in the game, if you will. It's a common phrase that oftentimes dads say. I love it, but get skin in the game, right? I'm willing to put myself on the line for this so that, I can feel like I'm invested and it's not just you paying for me to go have this experience.
Yeah, I mean, I could add something because I've always got something to say, but I think that's so well articulated. And I just really admire everyone who's thinking about it. And sometimes it's a student who wants it, the parents who are hesitant, and sometimes it's the parents who want it, and the students are hesitant. And that is a bridge to be crossed. And I think appealing to the other party with an earnestness and transparency and love and respect, showing that you've given it some thought, is great. I think the last thing I would say is, there are a handful of accredited consultants like us in the country, and nearly all of us offer a free conversation with a family. So if it's a student who's really having trouble getting a parent to the conversation, maybe bringing them in, say, hey, I saw these people speak, they give free consultations. Maybe we could talk to some experts and they could answer your concerns around safety or budget, et cetera, which are some of the big ones that we hear.
Such a great point. Such a good idea to kind of bring that voice into the conversation. Thank you both. Okay, John, I have got some great questions from John. John, please don't ever apologize for those. No pardons necessary. So John's first question is, do students bring up, or excuse me, when do students bring up the idea of a gap year with the schools that they apply to? During application process, after acceptance? If you could speak a bit on that, and then we'll jump into his next question below.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, John. And so generally speaking, if a senior is applying to schools, we suggest that you just apply to college and you don't bring up the gap year until your application process is done. I have heard some schools love hearing that it's something you're thinking of, and it could be advantageous to the application, but in general, I'd say it's still incredibly competitive. And at this point, you just want to communicate to the school that all you want is to be there, right? And play that kind of game and go through those roles. That being said, you can still simultaneously be nurturing the gap year question. Here's another great spreadsheet to open up, which is listing all the schools you're interested in. And first going to their websites, it's very likely they have a printed statement about deferrals and gap years. And paste that link in the second column. And if they don't, get in touch with the admissions office. And here's where you can play anonymous. Your child's application's already in or not in. You just say, I'm a parent. We're really interested in your school. We're also curious about a gap year. We think it could be great. We're hearing lots of good stuff about it. Can you tell me a bit about your school's stance on deferring in gap years? So you should be able to get all that information assembled relatively quickly and long before you even have an answer from that school. Which sets you up really well, particularly for seniors in this quiet wait time right now, to kind of have that all lined up. Yeah, I hope that answers that question.
I think that was perfect. Thank you so much, Jane.
Yeah.
And then John's second question is, my kid is open to gap year. However, he'll be just 16 years old when he graduates. What are some issues, working restrictions, etc., if younger than most gap year students?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Believe it or not, a lot of gap year students are not 18 when they are graduating. We see that relatively commonly. 16 is slightly younger than the age that we tend to see. So one thing you should know is that most facilitated, coordinated gap year programs, the kinds that you would find at the USA Gap Year Fairs, for example, are open to high school graduates. So a 16-year-old would likely not be excluded from those experiences. They would be included in that application process. And as long as they're a good fit, that's likely going to be a possibility for them. So that's important to know.
I'll just say, you will see 18 and up.
You will, yeah.
Give a quick call. Again, just like the the deferral piece, just give a quick call and say, well, he will be, or she will be a high school graduate, but she's 16. He's 16. Would you consider it? And almost every program will consider, yes, younger than 18 on a case-by-case basis is their kind of safety statement.
The interesting thing when we go beyond those more facilitated, coordinated programs is that independent volunteer experiences or internship opportunities or work exchange often do require, particularly outside of the United States, that a student is 18 or certainly has a parent who has signed off on them being there. We've found that in most internship experiences, you definitely have to be 18 in order to take those on internationally. And some of the work exchange sites, you would have to actually really have a strong conversation with them for a student who is 16 or 17, but it is possible. And we have seen exceptions to all of these. But it is likely that a 16-year-old will probably be looking more towards those facilitated
Yeah.
programs.
I agree.
Anything else to add to
No,
it?
I
Yeah.
agree completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, Jane. And if anybody has any other questions, please do throw those into the chat or into the Q&A box. Otherwise, this brings us to 7:45 EST, which is just our wrapping up time. So, wow, hats off to you, Jane and Jason, for timing that perfectly.
We aim to please.
I want to throw in a final plug just to visit this link that I'm going to drop into the chat, where our Gap Year Hub, which again is just a 24/7 resource where you can learn more about these scholarships that are available. And then again, it's on that page that we'll be launching our $5,000 scholarship come March 1st. And of course, it's also a really great place where you can register for an upcoming USA Gap Year Fair, perhaps even the one this Saturday, so you can chat more with Jason and learn more all about the Gap Year journey. And then I just want to thank everybody again for tuning in and joining us. We have another crash course coming up on Thursday, so I'm really hopeful that I'll be able to see you there as well. But if not, I hope everybody takes care and has a lovely, lovely night. And thank you again, Jane and Jason. That was awesome. As
So
always.
welcome. Good luck, everyone. Stay in touch. Let us know if we can help.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.